All right. I'm here with SoFech. How's it going?
Hey, doing really well. Can't complain. How's it going for you?
It's going wonderful. A little under the
Right
weather,
on.
but I'm all right.
Holding it together.
Holding it together.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess just to start, uh, go ahead and introduce yourself, your involvement with Gigantic, how you discovered the game, how you discovered Motiga, all that.
Yeah, I'll do the fan favorite. Greetings, gigantic fans. I'm SoFech. I've worked at basically every aspect of Gigantic that you can possibly imagine. To your question, I've been a community manager, social media and streaming specialist, work on the marketing team, work on the video team. I started off as a fan, of course. I was in the competitive scene for a little bit. I was an influencer, content creator. I've been to the events. I've done everything for Gigantic. And yeah,
Awesome.
I think I heard about Gigantic on their launch video in 2014, 2015. I think it was 2014 when
Yeah.
they released their first video. Yeah, and I was really into Smite at the time, and so I
Same.
think I think Smite was still in like their alpha phase or some kind of early testing phase. It was like preseason one for them, and I was having a great time with it. And I'm like, man, where can I find more of this? And then Gigantic popped up in my feed, and I read a press release about it, and it said it was a MOBA. And I remember seeing like Voden hopping around in the environment. And I'm like, oh, dude, I gotta play that guy. It looks so fun. And then I didn't get my hands on it for like another year and a half, you know. But yeah, I think that's when I first learned about Gigantic, and I learned about Motiga.
And then I know that you had some videos that you were making on the game. Is that how Motiga kind of discovered you and picked you up, or how did that process happen?
Yeah, actually, funny story. I was making a lot of videos for the game, and well, primarily what I was doing was I got into what was called the core community, which was like the most hardcore players, and it was a very exclusive ND8 environment where people got to play, and it was like a small, tight-knit community that they would only bring a few people in at a time, and those people had to be vetted by other people who were
Oh
already
wow.
in the community. So yeah, it was a uh, very private and exclusive community for them that was run by Motiga, and it just had a bunch of players. And so I started making videos that exposed a bunch of the broken stuff in the game. I was finding bugs galore. Like the first time I got my hands on it, I just hopped in and I was like, okay, how can I break this? And I had a lot of fun. I made a whole bunch of videos. And one of the game designers reached out to me and he's like, hey man, can you take this video down? It's exposing a lot of stuff that we don't want the players to have access to. And I'm like, oh yeah, sure. So I just started posting that stuff in core, and I was posting some of the more minor things on my YouTube channel at the time. I was streaming and playing a lot, and uh, I made a really silly video that was like an April Fool's joke that just had it was like a music video, and it had a bunch of the characters twerking and they were dancing around, and I think that really resonated well with the team at Motiga, and so they reached out to me and they offered me a job from there, and the rest is history.
They were like, after finding all this broken shit, the twerking stuff, that's what did it for us. We want you on board.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, that video got demonetized too. I have that
Oh
up as
no.
the pin post on my Twitter or my X or whatever that's called
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty funny. I had a lot of fun doing that stuff, and I was just super passionate about the game, and I think Motiga saw that in me. And yeah, they just reached out to me, and I hadn't applied, and actually it was So Much Monsters. I think he's gone by many names like
Mm.
Mojo or Mo Purple Drank. He has a bunch of monikers,
Hmm.
and he just sent me an email and he's like, hey man, we love what you do. You should send me your resume and we'll see about getting you on board.
That's awesome.
So yeah, really, I mean, I guess it was lucky, but they say luck is where preparation meets opportunity.
Mm.
And so I had the opportunity. I was definitely prepared. I put hundreds, if not 1,000 hours into the game at that point, just
At that
playing
point.
around with things. And yeah, I've
Wow.
played an absurd amount of Gigantic.
I thought 400 or 500 or wherever I'm at. I was like, damn, that's a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
That was like a year and a half in, I think. So I had a lot of time to put
Wow.
into it. But yeah, it was pretty cool.
Okay, so I guess when you first got hired, what was your position like, and kind of what was like the environment in Motiga, and how was that experience?
Yeah, so my position, I was hired on as I think my title was social media and streaming specialist.
Mm.
So I didn't know anything about social media at the time. I was pretty familiar with streaming. And so what I did for Motiga when I got uh, pulled into their team was I was doing a lot of the social media work exclusively, like working with the Perfect World team, who they were the publisher at the time. Um, to create like assets and social posts and engagement stuff on all of the different channels. And so it was a trial by fire, man. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was really passionate about it. And so I just picked it up and I kind of went from there.
That's awesome.
But the environment at Motiga was something like I had never seen before. And it's kind of par for the course for video game developers now that I've been in the industry for a while, but it's just like surreal going from a normal office environment, which is what I was in. I was in IT before getting picked up by Motiga, and seeing this game dev studio, it's just like a warehouse, and there's all of these stations set up and all the lights are shut off. There's like just the glow of these monitors that are reflecting everywhere, and they had all these toys and posters on the walls and all this concept art of all of their characters that was just like plastered across one wall. And then of course there's like a kitchen over in the corner and some office space, like conference rooms that are enclosed, but for the most part it's just this massive open area. And it creates such a really great culture because you can just stand up and you can just walk over to someone and be like, hey, what's up, what are you working on? Oh, cool. Oh, I need this from you. Or hey, let's play. And yeah, it was fun to be able to like yell at each other. And they had a whole section of Nerf guns, and we would do daily play tests. And so people would get the Nerf guns and they'd be shooting each other during the play test to try to distract them and
I've seen
try to get
some
an
clips
edge.
of the Nerf guns.
Yeah.
It's a wild time. I love it.
Yeah, it was really cool. It's fantastic. And everybody there was really welcoming and accommodating and super friendly. And yeah, it was just a blast. It was so much fun working at Motiga.
That's so cool. Yeah, all the stuff that I've seen, all the interviews that I've seen with staff when they were around, and it just seemed like such a humble collective environment where everyone was just like, we're truly just working together on something super special. You got to have like that relationship in order to make something like gigantic. It just
True.
it felt so tight knit in a positive way, not in a yeah, it seems great.
Yeah, it's a team. It's definitely a team environment.
Yeah.
That they everybody has to work together to collaboratively make something that succeeds.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Cool.
it's tough, but it's fun.
Well, what do you think? What do you think really inspired Gigantic's creation as a game? I had seen, I actually watched the Gigantic farewell stream for the first time. Just a little background. I told this to Falco too. I have to get my sob story, but I was so heartbroken by the game's decline that I like just dropped off. I stopped playing because I was just like, I can't handle this. But I went back a few weeks ago and I watched the farewell stream and I saw all this stuff for Raid. I saw all the old concepts for the characters and just so much crazy stuff. And I was just thinking, like, what was the inspiration behind, I guess, Raid first, but then the transition into what Gigantic became?
Yeah. I'm privileged enough that I've seen a lot of the concept art and I was able to talk with a bunch of the dev team and kind of get their thoughts on it. I wasn't part of the team during this game's inception. I kind of came on afterward, but I've spent a lot of time with it, so I think I can kind of say where that all came from. But yeah, like you mentioned, it was birthed from Raid, this idea that you go and fight a massive like MMO raid boss. And so I think that's where the initial idea came from, is just getting a team together and just fighting a massive raid boss. But then how do you put that in PvP? So then obviously you have to have another team and they come in and they fight. And so I think that's kind of where it spawned from, is just that idea of taking what's good about an MMO and translating that into something that feels better, that's more accessible, that's more snappy, that's more fun. And Gigantic was kind of on the cusp of the genre. There weren't really hero shooters at the time. I mean, I remember being at Motiga and there was like Bloodline Champions was, I guess, the closest thing. And then like Battle Right released, actually. Yeah, Bloodline Champions was earlier, but I think that like games like that inspired Gigantic. And um, Battle Right released around the time I started at Motiga, and so I remember a bunch of people playing that and trying to take inspiration from it. And like obviously League of Legends and other MOBAs, Dota 2, things like that had a big impact on the direction that the game took, but I don't think that was much of the inspiration at its core.
Mm.
At its core, it was just what the devs wanted to make was something that was really cool and unique and fresh. And that that was great. That was also one of its problems because it had a little bit of trouble finding its footing because it didn't fit into a specific genre.
Mm.
But yeah, for the most part, I think that about sums it up. It was just like a culmination of all of the coolest things. What could they possibly make? Taking little pieces of all these other genres and trying to make something really unique and special.
Yeah, that is interesting because I always thought of it more as a MOBA than a hero shooter, but I found that it got compared to hero shooters the most. I guess just because of the team aspect, but yeah, it I guess like sometimes when you do have a little bit of too much ideas, sometimes you can't really land your footing properly. But that's something that I appreciated so much about it is that it took so many core elements from these different kinds of games and like mashed it into one thing, and it was so unique at the time. Um, which I guess kind of follow ups into the next question. What do you think was like were like the biggest things that made it unique, and what did it offer at the time that no other game did, or even today still doesn't?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think that there's so many little things that push gigantic outside of the buckets that you would expect from a hero shooter or a MOBA. I think for me, one of the most unique things is the characters.
Mm,
It definitely feels hero shooter esque in that, maybe like hero brawler or something. But there's a major focus on the characters, and I haven't really seen other games do things like that. I guess Heroes of the Storm kind of has very customizable characters with their talents and stuff, but nothing similar to Gigantic, where there's so much options for your character. There's so much player agency. There's so much that you can do. There's different branching paths for all of your skills and upgrades. You have your focus, and you can choose where to spend that. You have, dodge and sprint, and the platforming, and just the way that the player can interact with the environment and the other things around it. I think that's really the most unique thing about Gigantic. It's hard to put it into like one word or one
right.
sentence
Yeah.
because it just means so much. But just like the way that you control your character and the agency you have over that, I think is the most unique thing about the game.
Yeah, I think verticality too was something I had never really seen before. I think the stamina system played in a lot into that game. Is like on Ghost Street, for example, there were the little like cactus platforms in the middle. It's like you could use those to jump from ledge to ledge and like do all kinds of movement mechanics and like mess
Yeah,
up your
super jump up to tricky sniper
yeah,
spots
yeah,
and
and
other
like your
things like
opponent
that.
would have to chase you around. It was so interesting, like cat and mouse type gameplay
Yeah.
that you hadn't really seen before. So it was a whole nother aspect, I think. Well, cool. Um, okay, so kind of shifting into the business side, I guess. Uh, Motiga had a partnership with Microsoft where uh, they began developing the game exclusively for Xbox and the Windows Store, I believe. So, what were the main reasons for this partnership?
Yeah, the main reason for the partnership specifically was because Motiga was an indie developer. They had sources of money that were funding development, and then like many games happen, and this happens very often to just indie games in general, they run out of money.
Hmm.
And also Motiga really hired like the cream of the crop. They hired some of the best developers that I've seen. I've been in the industry for like 7 coming up on 8 years now, I think. And yeah, Motiga just had some of the tippy top tier of developers, and it's expensive to operate and to be able to put out a game, especially a game that's like new like this. So sometimes you have to find a publisher, sometimes you want to find partners. Microsoft had a really great opportunity for them too, so it wasn't just about the money. It's they were really hyping up UWP, Universal Windows Platform, which was like their Windows 10 gaming thing after Windows Live
Mm,
was being shut down. So yeah, it was like a PC platform that was pitched as trying to be something that competed against Steam. And so
right.
of course you want to get on that. It's like it's hard to look back on that and think it was a good idea, but of course at the time like Epic didn't exist, all these other platforms like Ubisoft and all those other third party like game launchers that just weren't really around. And so this
Um,
seemed like a great opportunity for them.
right. And
And
Microsoft is, I mean, they're one of the biggest companies ever. They're like the kings of the PC space. Everyone runs on Windows, everyone uses Microsoft
yeah, of course.
software. So, if anyone's going to do it, it would have been them. So, yeah, you're
And
totally right.
to that point, crossplay wasn't really a thing either. And
Mm,
so Microsoft had crossplay between PC and Xbox, which like just was unheard of at the time. But because of their universal Windows platform, because of the Windows 10 platform that they had, you're able to crossplay with console players. And so like, that's a great pitch. Of course we want to do that.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they were also at the forefront of that, and so I know there were a lot of problems with it. Like I remember playing early builds of Gigantic, and it was localized in a whole bunch of different languages, and they had to cut a lot of that for the Microsoft deal because they just didn't
Mm.
have time, and also Microsoft had some restrictions on those kinds of things, and they had to like change the UI so that it worked on console because it was primarily PC before, and so a whole bunch of things had to be changed because of this. And like I mentioned, they were at the forefront of this. As far as I understand, there was not very good documentation on how to develop for UWP. So they were just pioneering all these things, having to
Oh
figure
my
it out
God.
themselves. Like, it was new. There weren't that many developers they could talk to about how to overcome programming struggles and errors and bugs and things. So just had to push through and figure it out on their own.
Wow.
That created a lot of hurdles.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, overall, I think what came out of that was pretty positive. I think the UI was a lot better now, and the way that the game shaped up because of this, I mean, it definitely wouldn't have been the same game without this direction.
Right. I guess
So it's like,
what do you think were, if you had to guess, like the specific biggest struggles when they were developing it for the Microsoft platforms?
oh man, I it's hard for me to be able to speak on that specifically, not being like a design developer and a
Right.
programmer. But I would say it's probably a lot of the issues that they had translating things into the UWP environment. Because I remember seeing all the bug reports and
Oh
things that,
God.
yeah, like the struggles trying to integrate, take the entire code and transfer it over into this brand new platform. Because
Right.
it was like a solo launcher before. It wasn't tied into anything. So yeah, then they had to integrate all the Xbox things. So I would say that was probably it.
Okay. Well, so then after the fact, they went down that road for a while, and then Perfect World approached Motiga and decided to partner with them, and that resulted in the game having a full release on Steam and also the Arc client. Um, so for me, I forget exactly when I hopped on the train. I think it was right before the Perfect World partnership. But I remember it was explosive for the game. At least in my opinion, I remember a huge influx of players. Big streamers were playing it. It had a lot of eyes on it. But obviously, regardless, the game still declined a lot. So I'm curious what you think, in your opinion, like why did the game still fail in the way that it did, even though it got what it needed, a full release on Steam. I mean, that's the best case, right?
Yeah, I've done a lot of reports on this, and in my opinion, and based on the data that I have, I think that Gigantic primarily failed because it was too late to market. So
Mm,
you mentioned something that I'm pretty proud of, that a lot of streamers were playing this. We were one of the first companies, at Perfect World to actually hire on a bunch of streamers to get influencers to do an ad spot for us. That wasn't, I mean, that was like, it wasn't common, it was happening back then in 2017, 2016, 2017, but it wasn't as prominent as it was now. And again, it's hard to look back on that. Was it the right idea? Was should we have spent the money elsewhere on marketing? Who knows? But we were really trying to push the boundary and try to find new ways to reach an audience. And a lot of people talk about the marketing being bad in the game, and that's a
mm.
sore spot for me because I was on the marketing team
Oh
at the
no.
time, and we tried really hard, and we were everywhere. We had blowouts on IGN. We did all these in-person events. We had huge PAX booths and all these things. So I think that people think that the marketing wasn't good because they didn't see us on TV at the time, or we weren't in a magazine, whatever magazine they read, but we
Mm,
were we were everywhere. I think we covered the spectrum. We were
mm,
also on Twitch, we were on YouTube, we just blew up on all those places. So yeah, I don't think it was marketing. I think that specifically why the game failed to find an audience were actually two things. The first was we were late to market. The game was announced in 2014, but it didn't come out until after like Paladins was out and Overwatch was out and all these other games beat us. And actually, while I was working at Motiga, PUBG started, right?
mm,
So we were actually past the MOBA slash hero shooter era and already moving into battle royales by the time Gigantic released. So it was like too late at that point. People were already moving on to something else. Another thing was the new player experience wasn't so great in Gigantic. It's a very dense game. It's hard to get into. Once you know, but it's difficult to communicate to a new player like this is what you should be looking at. Whereas in like a hero shooter, it's really easy. Just follow your team or just run forward and you find an enemy with a red health bar and you shoot them. In a MOBA, it's just like same thing. There's something with a red health bar. There's like a tower, or you can just follow your friendly creeps down a lane, and it'll lead you to where you need to go. But in Gigantic, you have this big map, and it doesn't tell you where you need to go.
Mm,
The UI team and the design team and the developers really tried to add things like little icons that pop up and things that'll catch your attention and stuff. But generally, for a new player, they just want to go in and press buttons, and they're not going to succeed if they do that because
right,
that's not actually the right thing.
right, right.
Dying is really bad in Gigantic. It's hard to communicate that to players because then you're feeding power to the enemy team, which then gives them a rampage, which then wins them the game. And so like it's hard. The new player experience, just in general, like the skill floor that you have to have is so much higher than other games. You can't
Mm.
just flub your way in. So that was a problem. I don't think that was the main problem. The main problem is definitely just too late to market.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because obviously at the time, I mean, being a part of the community, the biggest thing was having to defend the game against Overwatch and Paladins as the big ones, which was very difficult. But that's a really good point about like PUBG because battle royales became just titans, massive games. So it's like
Yeah.
to have both of those working against you is really hard to make your game successful in that environment. Um, but also to your point about the new player experience, I talked a little bit about that with Falco, and she brought up a great point, which is kind of how I felt is, and you guys totally could have had this in the works, but I always thought like an arena type game mode would have been really helpful for that. Something like, I don't know if you said you've played Smite, like the arena mode, you just hit buttons. You can
Yeah.
get your experience with the item shop, upgrade your abilities, just hit some buttons, have a good time. And then once people get the concepts of like the stamina and the abilities down, then they can go into the standard mode and learn about creatures and learn about power. And you know, of course, in retrospect, we look back and we're like, this is what you should have done. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard to. I imagine you guys were on your toes constantly trying to figure out like, what do we do? Putting out fires.
Yeah. There were some pretty major changes right before launch. And actually, so how much time do we have? Can I rant for a little bit?
Yeah, we got 30 minutes.
All right, cool. So the game initially launched December 2016 on Xbox and UWP. So that was part of the Microsoft contract. Like it's obviously it released 6 months on Xbox before it could launch on the other platforms. And then we put it out on Arc in June of 2017, and then July of 2017 was when it hit Steam. So during that period between the Xbox launch and the Arc launch, there was substantial changes, and those were reactionary to one, what players were saying about the game, but two, how the market was shifting. So there were some pretty big things that happened to like creatures during that time. And yeah, of course, we were always looking at what other games were in the market and trying to figure out what was working for them and what direction things were going in, how to make the game more accessible. And so yeah, we tried, we really tried.
Yeah.
Hindsight's 2020, but I
Yeah, of
think
course.
but I mean, you look at the game in the state that the state that it's in now is that it doesn't exist anymore. But I guess it exists in our minds, and it's remembered very fondly.
Right.
So if we would have watered it down, then would people have still liked the game as
True.
much? If it was more accessible, would it have found the hardcore audience that still love the game and remember it as fondly as they do?
Yeah. I mean,
Who knows?
it shows like the community that was dedicated to it was really dedicated, and still are. Like, it's
Yeah,
been 5, 6 years, and people still talk about it every day. I'm in
yeah,
Discords where people talk about it all day, every day. And it's like, wow, the 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 ideas that the game presented just really stuck around, even though you can't really play it anymore. Um, well, cool. Well, as a little extra question that I wanted to throw in, do you have a personal favorite or least favorite character? Factor in like playing as them, playing against them, design, all the above.
yeah. My personal favorite character is Zenobia.
Cool.
Initially, I wanted to play Ashlyn, and my first couple games were Ashlyn, but then I discovered Zenobia, and I'm like, all right, Ashlyn, like the Toy Story meme. I don't want to play with you anymore, and so I just moved over to Zenobia. I
Yeah.
think I really like playing support and healers and tanks, and she can kind of do all that stuff.
Right.
And yeah, I know she wasn't very good for most of the life of the game, but then the last patch actually made her incredibly strong, and people don't remember that, and I know people don't get the opportunity to play on that now, but yeah, she was just a mainstay of mine. For least favorite character, probably Zandora. She was the character that
Wow.
I was the most excited for, and I so okay in Warhammer Online, my favorite class was Knight of the Blazing Sun, and it's like an aura class, and
Mm,
so it's like a tank. And I really love that concept of being able to support your team and twisting auras and being able to like buff during certain situations. Use the speed boost when you need to engage, and then use the damage one, use the healing like mid combat, and get the burst and get the cleanse and all that stuff. I thought it was really cool. But oh man, I feel like the character just didn't end up being the way that I wanted.
mm.
And also, she had really fat, pudgy cheeks at first when she
I
launched, and I hated the way
remember
she looked.
that. I
Yeah, and
remember
so,
that.
yeah, so the design team went back and they gave her a more chiseled, defined look that looked a lot more heroic. And so the way she looks now is better, but yeah, I just think that there was a lot of opportunities for that character to be something really special, and I feel like she never really found her niche in the game because she couldn't really tank. You still kind of need Margrave if you're looking for a tank.
Right.
She's kind of squishy on her own, and she's great in like dive comps and stuff. But yeah, she just wasn't really able to find footing, and so that's why I think she's my least favorite. Is that I'm just disappointed with her. But we used to do play tests all the time at Motiga, and I played Zandora exclusively for like a month. And I was
Wow.
writing all this feedback, and I was like, this doesn't work, the synergy's here and all these things. And I'm like, this is what I think should be done.
Please fix my
And yeah,
character.
yeah, fix my character for me, please, James Finney. And he even called me out in one of the meetings. He's like, yeah, all right, we're getting ready to release Andorra. I know SoFech might not be too happy with her, but I think she's coming along, or he said something like that. And I was like, all right,
Oh.
yeah, thanks, Finney. But I know he worked really hard on that character, and just overall, you can't be too upset. It's not my vision. It's the design team's vision,
Right.
and so uh, we were able to provide a lot of feedback on all of the characters and the balance in general and stuff. And there's a vast chasm between the skill levels between different players, especially at the high end and like brand new players coming in, and that's what you get in the office too. So yeah, I understand like they released that character the way it was. I'm just a little disappointed, and that's why I think it's my least favorite.
She's
All
actually
the other
the
characters are dope.
Yeah, she's actually the first character I ever played, and I
Oh yeah.
also I didn't play her that much, but for like a good week or two when I was learning the game, I played only her because it's like the auras are super easy to keep track of. But then I discovered Wu and Gnosis, and I was like, okay, I can
Oh
fit
yeah.
both roles.
Oh yeah, for sure. I forgot to mention a critical piece of that too. Is Zandora was the first hero overview trailer that I did for Motiga, so it was like my
Oh,
first official piece of content, like a long form content that I put out for for a game company. And I spent a ridiculous amount of time, late nights, working my ass off, learning everything about this character, the ins and outs and stuff, and I just became sick of her after that. So that's
yeah,
one of them. Yeah, I should have mentioned that first, but that's one of the reasons I hate that character now.
that could
Is
definitely do it
just
to
like,
you.
oh, I
Yeah,
just looked at her for so long, and like the sound of her ult just rings in my head. It's such a cool sound, but it's like, oh man, I'm just sick of it now.
that's funny. Okay. Are you able to kind of share any ideas, future heroes, game modes, concepts, whatever that the game had in store? I know in the farewell stream, obviously you showed off like um, some characters models. You showed off a little bit of gameplay of some of the characters that were pretty much almost finished. I think you showed off a couple of maps, but I guess just to go a little bit more in depth about it, or things that you didn't show off, things that were maybe just talked about but never shown, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I can probably share a lot of that stuff. Let me pull up the wiki real quick and make sure that I'm not doubling up on some things. So, okay. As far as heroes were concerned, like a lot of that stuff has been data mined and it's kind of out there in the public,
Mm.
but there were a lot of unreleased characters. Like Roland, who was a character initially, and he got removed to be reworked before official launch. He was a character that should have been in the game. He was a mainstay. Actually, he's He's right here. There's
He's right
Roland
there.
on. Yep. So he was on our promotion material on the key art even. So, oh man, I miss Roland.
And
He
he
was
had
the next
his
character
he
to
was the
be
next
up after
character.
T-Mat. Yeah, because he was getting pretty close to being done. Like his kit was flushed out.
I saw
Just
the
needed some polish.
redesign of him as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a bummer. Also, a fan favorite is Kajir. He's like a little snaky cat dude. He's like a pirate, a space pirate, and he has these two little daggers, and he stealths around, and he's got a little funny wiggle when he walks, and so people love that. And then there's like another character, Bolga, who I think her codename was Juggernaut. Yeah, that's the character that I wanted.
I know,
Emo
she
tank.
looked great. I was like,
Yeah.
this character is for me. This is the character that I'm waiting for.
She's like a rage tank where she gains rage, and I think it at some point in development it like costs some of her health to do more damage or to get defense or something like that. And yeah, she had like a stance where she would use her focus, her ultimate, and she would become this like enraged character, and she would go Super Saiyan, and her hair was like flowing, and she'd change color and stuff, and her skill set would change slightly, and so yeah, stuff like that was pretty cool. And then there's Javash as well, which the concept art for all these characters is out there. He was like a sand monk, and he had like a stick with a staff with like a bell on it. He had a bunch of stand-based attacks that would like debuff and slow. And then yeah, there's other characters like Potshot, who's a little like a frog guy riding on top of a water skimmer, and some other things like Rang, who was one of a Rose Cone Mango's characters. That's Henry. It's like a boomerang character, and I think the concept art was out there for that too. Like this elegant unicorn-looking dude, and he would dance around and throw these boomerangs, and also I think they were like fans actually, which
Mm,
would have been pretty sweet. But yeah, lots of character stuff that was in some state of development that fortunately, never got out there. But also
yeah,
there were other maps too, like
yeah.
I think I've talked about Magma before, which was my favorite map, which was really fascinating because a lot of the initial design for Gigantic that was actually removed over the course of development for time concerns and just like technical issues was there was like the maps would change and the environment would move and alter, like especially during rampages the environment would alter, and that was hard to communicate to players too. So you okay, the map is different now, you have to go over here. So I'm sure that's one of the reasons they removed that. But Magma was cool because at certain intervals the map would just fill with lava, and so it would create different paths and it would block off other areas.
Mm.
I thought that was so cool because I played Zenobia, so you could just cliff people, just wave of sorrow them off into the lava, and they would just instantly die. And so it created more cliff opportunities and just like hazards and danger zones and stuff like that in games. I think is really fun and fascinating. There was like a Sky City map, and people have seen um, the old raid maps. There were things like that that were kicking around, and yeah, I'm probably forgetting some. Oh, there were what was the name of it? Dang, I forgot. It was the old tutorial map, but there were a bunch of different assets that were used from the old tutorial map that were used to like create different environments that never really got fleshed out, but tons of stuff that was work in progress. Oh yeah, night maps too. Canyon Night was something that we tested a lot, and that map was mostly the same where like the middle was kind of similar, like the snaky thing, but then the outsides were very different. There were other paths, and there was like a ramp that would lead up on the right side that would take you over into the opponent's uh like point, and there were certain sniper spots that were blocked off, and it caused you to really approach the map differently. I remember a lot of the problem with the night maps was that they had to be completely retextured and relit,
Oh
because you
wow.
can't just change the lighting on
Yeah.
a map that looks like it's daylight, right? It's all like bright and orange and stuff, and then you have to change the entire lighting to be like blues and purples and deep colors. So yeah, those never came about, probably because it was just too much time for development. But the last one that I'll mention, and we can move on to the next one, is you mentioned something about other game modes like Smite's arena mode. We had a game mode that was internally called Brawl, and what it was kind of like a King of the Hill type mode. So I'm sure people have seen that the old Wizard Woods, or wait, what is it called now? Ember Grove.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, so Ember Grove had a point in the middle that you could capture, and it was like a King of the Hill point for a lot of development, where you would just stand there and it would fill a progress bar for your team, and then if the enemy team that was on there too, it would stop, and then you push them off, and then it would fill for the enemy team, so whoever filled their bar first would capture that point. And so we used that mechanic on a bunch of new maps in this game mode called Brawl that was designed specifically with new players in mind because new players are having trouble getting into the game. Unfortunately, that game mode was a little bit more complicated even because you still had rampages. The maps weren't designed with the same flow as the
Mm,
base maps, which had like 3 years of development time, and so it was a little bit rushed. I don't think it would have saved the game. It was fun, it was different, but yeah, brawl mode was out there, and there's a lot of stuff that never got released. Things that were work in progress, a lot of skins and things, but most of that stuff, like the concept art's out there. So if you're interested, I'm sure you can look it up. Hit up the gigantic wiki. It's
Wiki
on
has a lot
fandom.
of stuff, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff on there.
Yeah, it's actually kind of interesting. I didn't know too much about the nighttime maps. It the thing that is interesting about Gigantic in a competitive sense is like since it kind of falls in the realm of a MOBA, MOBAs only have one map that you always play on, and it's usually the same, right? But
Yeah.
that's interesting with a game like Gigantic. What are the like competitive reasons for having a nighttime and a daytime that are slightly different? And like, do you think they would have like voted on maps, kind of like Smash Brothers or something, or like how would that have worked?
Yeah, I think if it was just like random queue comp, then it would just put you in whatever map, probably
Right,
similar to how Heroes of the Storm worked.
right.
I know they took some inspiration from the dynamics in Heroes of the Storm, but in the last build of the game, there was a custom mode, and you could select which map. And
Mm,
so I know the players created tools to do picks and bans, draft, and be able to pick the map. So yeah, put it in the hands of the players, give them the power.
word. That's awesome. Well, uh, kind of as my final question, obviously Gigantic is not around anymore. It still exists in some capacity, but it's obviously not very accessible and doesn't have all the features it had before. But do you think that Gigantic, in the state that it was in, and I guess with the stuff that it had going for it, that was going to come out and all that, do you think if it were released today, do you think that it could do better than it did? Do you think it'd have a chance?
If Gigantic were to re-release today in exactly the same state it was in before, I don't think it would have legs. I think that it would create a lot of commotion and people would probably come back to play it, but it didn't succeed because of other things. Like I mentioned, the new player experience, it being very obtuse to get invested in and to get into. Uh, Other things with the game that maybe aren't obvious is like the way the characters look doesn't really resonate with the Asian market. They're not cutesy, they're like primary shapes and stuff like that. So it kind of limits itself in that regard. There's a massive continent of people who didn't really play the game because of the way it looks. So uh, also on the platforms it was on without crossplay and all those things, yeah, if it were just to release exactly as it was when it shut down, I still think it'd probably have the same fate. No updates or any other content going in the future, none of that stuff. Yeah, that's we like to think like, oh, it's just easy, just turn the servers back
Yeah,
on,
right.
but servers cost money. What are people going to do? It's going to feel like you're paying for a PvP game that's not going to have an audience,
Hmm.
that's not going to get updates or anything. So yeah, I don't think that it would have any kind of success if it were just to release exactly how it was right now.
Right. Yeah, I'd probably agree with you. And I think one of the tricky things that I've thought about too, and I'm not a game designer, so I don't know how big these hurdles actually are, but the game was built on Unreal Engine 3, which is very old at this point.
Yeah,
So, in order for the game to, I guess, compete on a technology level or a game engine level, you'd have to rebuild the whole thing.
yeah,
Essentially, and Motiga doesn't exist anymore, so it'd be a different team. So, it's kind of like a really hard one, I think. Is like, would they
yeah.
just release it on Unreal and then build from there, or Unreal 3 and build from there, or would they have to rebuild it and put assets into that and hope for the best?
Yeah, that's a really good point. The game had a lot of technical issues too. Like people could see through the world sometimes, textures weren't loading, the geometry wasn't loading in the environments. Disconnects were very common. The whole thing, just the nature of Unreal 3, it's so old, it doesn't have a lot of the quality of life things that you need. Uh, like if you disconnect there was a function, I think, to be able to return to the game, but it didn't work half the time. And if it did, then your health bar was broken, and those are just stuff that you couldn't fix in the time that they had.
I remember that
So
happening to me. Yeah, it's
yeah,
frustrating.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that that it's hard to say like, what do you do? You know,
Hmm.
you can't just spin the servers back up. You kind of need a developer to be able to fix those things. Who do you hire?
Right,
What's the return on investment on that stuff? So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just as easy as bringing it out there. Also,
right.
something that we looked into was releasing the source code, just giving it to the players. But there was a lot of legal hurdles with that. I remember one of the examples that was used in a discussion about that specifically at Perfect World was like, what if somebody puts Kermit the Frog in our game? You know, and then they come at us for legal reasons. You know, oh,
Mm,
this is not a fair use character. This isn't a game that's making money in some sense. We would assume, you know, or like, how do you deal with those things?
right.
How do you deal with the legal hurdles?
Wow.
So there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just bring the game back. It's not just release the source code. You have
Right.
to do a lot for those things. So yeah, it sucks.
If it
What
was
do you do?
as if it was as simple as that,
It would have happened already.
it would have happened already. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
every game
Um,
would do that. You know, just release the source code. Who cares at that
right.
point?
Yeah, yeah.
But I don't know.
Well, I guess it's kind of like a wrap up. You work at Perfect World now, which is now Gearbox, correct?
No, I do not work for that company anymore, unfortunately.
Oh,
Yeah, but it's okay, you know, no hard feelings. I did my best to try to bring Gigantic back. Did everything I could. I did tons of reports and I really pushed it. And I was talking with people and making videos and decks and providing data and just doing everything I could. So, you know, unfortunately, I was the last Motigan, the last of the Motigans.
no.
So
I'm
yeah, who
sorry to
knows
hear
what's gonna
it.
happen, you know? Yeah, but I hope it's in good hands, and if they decide to do anything with it in the future, then you know I'll definitely be playing. So
Are you able
look
to
forward to it.
share what you're working on currently, where you're at, what you're doing?
Oh, sad story. I'm unemployed right now. Yeah, there
Get
was
this
a
man a
massive
job.
reduction in force. You know, yeah, thanks for pulling this on me in this interview. But yeah, yeah, there was a reduction in force at Gearbox. The parent company, Embracer Group, had some $2 billion deal fall through, and
I
so they
heard
had
about
to lay a
that.
bunch of people off.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm so
so
sorry.
sucks. Yeah, it's okay. Happens.
Yeah,
But yeah, I'm sure I'll rebound. I'm very passionate and skilled in what I do, and I have a lot of experience. So I'll find
definitely.
something. You know, it's the game industry. It's really small, so I'll be able to bounce back no problem.
Cool. Well, I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your insight on the game and how great it was.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me. You know, I love Gigantic. It's always fun to talk about it. As you can see, I still have these, which were gifted to me when Motiga shut down. So I have a couple other ones too. I have a Voden one and a Roland one, but I only have space for two, so I got to keep these ones up. But yeah, you
Awesome.
know, it's been a pleasure. Thanks. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, of course.